Hello, fellow birders. My name is Dennis Kania. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at Connecticut Warbler and Mourning Warbler. These two species in particular are real skulkers, and we don't often get very good looks at them. So it's a good idea to prepare yourself for those quick encounters. Through the DuPage Birding Club's education channel, we'll be taking a look at all things bird related. As I mentioned, we'll be taking a closer look at Connecticut Warbler and Mourning Warbler. So to start things off, let's take a look at records from Fermilab. And again, we've been collecting data there for 33 years. And you can see that our encounters with Connecticut Warblers are largely in the second half of May. So it's not going to be one of our early warblers usually. We do get them in the first week every now and then on spring counts, but for the most part, we expect the vast majority of the birds to be showing up in the second half of May. And they're not here for very long. We do again get encounters starting very late August, but mostly into September. And before the month is over, they're usually departed. Mourning Warbler, very similar. We do have some records here that look like they come in possibly a little bit earlier. But for the most part, our encounters are going to be in the second half of May. And then we don't get them again until fall migration, starting around the beginning of September. And last year I did find one pretty late in October. So that's what this little record is here. There are other sites within the county that we can be looking for both of these species. In all four corners of the county, you can go down to Waterfall Glen or Green Valley, even out in the southwest to Springbrook, or up to the northwest to Prattswain Woods. Morton Arboretum is a good site. Fullersburg's a good site. So there's quite a few different places that we can be looking for these. I left out Elson's Hill. That's also an excellent site to be looking. So here's our males of both species. And if all we had to deal with were the males, it'd be a very easy task. You can see that there's some very definite differences between these two birds. Both species have a very well-developed hood that encompasses all the way down into the upper breast. So a very, very gray area here. And we do see that there's a large hood on Mourning Warblers as well. What Mourning Warblers have that the Connecticut's do not have is this little black bib. And this is a pretty robust bib on this individual. On this one, it's rather thinned out, and I've seen them even thinner than this. But we don't have to count on seeing that black bib along with the gray hood. We can also look at the eye-ring, and these are quite obvious. We can see that Connecticut Warbler has a very bold, complete eye-ring, in both cases here. And you can see that Mourning Warbler has no eye-ring whatsoever. And if you look in front of the eye here in the lower, you can see it's a little darker on occasion. So in general, you can see that these birds look quite different than a lot of our other warblers. They're pretty big warblers. You can see they look very heavy build, and I think that's easily seen in all of these images. They're also very large-footed, long-legged and large-footed. And so this Connecticut here has very big feet. And we can see that these look rather large as well on the Mourning Warbler. Here are there's a female Connecticut Warbler. And again, we still see an eye-ring. Generally, that eye-ring will be complete. If there is a break in the eye-ring at all, it'll usually be in the very back end of the eye-ring here, and it's very, very minor. But for the most part, I expect to see a full eye-ring. You can see we still have that hooded effect going on. Regardless of whether we're looking at kind of an olivey brown bird or looking at a grayish bird, we still see a complete hood going on. You can see that hood makes it down no matter what season we're in, and the plumage, we're always going to see a bib that comes all the way down. And even if the throat is light, we still do not have a broken bib and yellow coming up from the breast. So keep those features in mind. Here's our Mourning Warbler. Again, even on the female, a full hood. And you can see it coming down here and here as well. But we have yellow bleeding through that hood and getting up into the throat. And that's actually happening here too. So even though we have a hood, lots of times we'll end up with it being broken and color moving up from the breast up into the throat area. This bird is a spring bird, and we're not seeing that broken hood at all. It is paler here, but it's not that yellow bleeding up into that area. But another thing to take a very close look at is that eye-ring. So just like the female Connecticut Warbler, we also have an eye-ring on the female Mourning Warbler, but it is a broken eye-ring. And not only is it broken in the back here, but it's also broken in the front. And we can see that on all three of these individuals. There are definite breaks in that eye-ring. It's a pretty well-pronounced eye-ring, but it does have the breaks. And in this case, you can actually see that just like we saw on that one male, you can see that the lower is slightly darker here. Another thing you might see on occasion on female Mourning Warblers is that there's a supraloral here. So what would normally be a supercilium running here, you can see just in front of the eye that it's a little paler. You see it on this individual, you can see it on this individual as well. This one looks pretty good. So I'm not actually seeing that here. But keep that in mind that you could actually see that little extra bit of yellow in the face here. But the main thing to key in on is that eye ring. So in this image, I just threw this in here so you could see what the undersides of these birds are looking like. As a general rule, we will see that Connecticut's are a little bit more pale than the Mourning Warblers. The color's a little bit richer in the yellows on the Mourning. But the key thing I wanted you to see here was just how far out the undertail covers go on the tail. They do reach very, very far. That makes these birds look kind of short-tailed. And when you're comparing to some of the other species that you might confuse it with, you won't see that really long undertail cover reaching way out like this. You can see the features that we discussed already. You can see a complete eye ring here. So this one must be a Connecticut. And you can see this one has a broken eye ring, and you can see that the lower is slightly darkened as well. So this one is the Mourning Warbler, and here's our Connecticut Warbler. You can see how heavy the bills are. These are pretty good sized bills, and you can see that the feet are quite large as well. So if all we had to deal with were those Connecticut Warblers and Mourning Warblers, we wouldn't have much trouble. These are much sought after birds, and everyone's trying to find Connecticut's and Mournings. And so sometimes we let our imagination get away with ourselves a little bit. And so we need to take into consideration some of the species that might closely resemble our major prizes of Connecticut and Mourning. And one of the star contenders in this category would be Nashville Warbler. And you can see it has many of the same features. You can see it's kind of yellowish underneath here, kind of olivey on the back. It has the gray head. Has a well-developed eye ring. So a lot of those features would be consistent, but it does have a very small, thin, needle-like bill. You can see even the legs are dark here. And you can see that in the belly region, it actually gets quite whitish. So there's several features here in plumage that would tell us that we're not looking at Connecticut or Mourning Warbler. And the other thing that would be a big clue is just how the bird is behaving. This is going to be an arboreal bird. He's going to be up out of the low understory. In the fall, he might go down in the goldenrod like we see this one right here, but he's not going to be skulking around as much, and he will come up out of there. He'll fly up into the trees, and he'll be hanging, and he'll be very actively feeding. And our Connecticut and our Mourning are not going to behave like that at all. They're going to stay hidden more or less. They're going to be closer to the ground. Connecticut, in fact, will be walking around on the ground. So quite a different behavior between this species and our target species. Common yellowthroat is another contender. In the fall, we're going to see individuals like this. And again, it has some characteristics that would remind us of our targets. You can see it's kind of an olivey brown on the back. You can see some yellow marks on the underside here. You can see an eye ring. So features, again, that might lead us in the wrong direction. But it does have, again, a thinner bill, smaller bill. It does have pinkish legs like the Connecticut and Mourning do. But what it does have that those two birds do not have is this flank area that is very olivey brown. And so that should be a big giveaway as far as separating these birds out. And the last contender that we have is our friend the yellow warbler. And again, you're seeing some drab olivey back. It's kind of washed out here underneath. This is a very, very dull individual. So we're not getting the yellow tones here. And if you recall our tutorial on yellow warblers, we would expect that all the edgings of all the wing feathers to be yellowish. And here, this is a really washed out bird, so we're not really getting a yellow feel from these feathers. You are seeing it here in the secondaries and in the primaries. And even in the tail feathers, which should also be edged in yellow, you can kind of see it here. But we can remember that whenever we're really puzzled by a very drab bird like this that is showing some characteristics, that if we were to see the underside of the tail, we would see these yellow spots or thumbprints that would be on the underside of the tail. And that's a real giveaway for this particular species. This eye-ring doesn't show up very well here in this image, but there is an eye-ring here, so that's why I threw it in. And I've seen people misidentify all three of these as Connecticut warblers. So keep that in mind. Yellow warbler, common yellowthroat, and Nashville. Yellow warbler, it's kind of a problem because we don't actually see them in migration very often, in the fall migration. They're an early migrant, and they tend to leave, and they're out of our area before we ever start having any serious concentration on warbler migration in the fall. So they're gone. They're off the table by the time we're looking at some of these other warblers. So I'd like you to keep in mind that male Connecticut and mourning should be easy to separate based on that hood composition and whether or not there's an eye-ring. Females of both species can be separated on the completeness of the eye-ring and the completeness of the hood on the upper breast. And then there are those other contenders, the most obvious being Nashville, which does have a lot of the same features. And we talked about just how different its behavior is, and that would easily help us to separate it from those other two species. Common yellowthroat, the females in the fall will have an eye-ring. They have plumage similarities, but they do have those olive brown flanks, so we should be able to eliminate that one. And yellow warbler female will have an eye-ring in the fall, or can have an eye-ring in the fall. We seldom run into that species, and I think that is part of the problem. We don't see them very often, so we're not really well prepared for dealing with yellow warblers. So with all of this in mind, you should have a good idea of what to be expecting when a Connecticut or mourning shows up. And again, they are skulkers, so they're not going to show themselves well. Your look might be very brief, so it's best to have a good feel for what you're going to be looking for before you encounter them. So thanks for taking the time to view this video. Hopefully we have given you some bird food for thought. And I hope you'll join us again in the future for all things bird related.